The Chicago Bears are going to look quite a bit different on Sunday against the San Francisco 49ers. Of course, it's Thomas Brown's first game as interim head coach, but it's also defensive coordinator Eric Washington's first ever game calling plays, and some key injuries on both sides of the ball could lead to some new starting lineups for the Bears.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. On the show today, we discuss what we're looking for out of Thomas Brown in this first game with him as offensive coordinator and with wide receivers coach Chris Beatty as offensive coordinator. Thomas Brown is head coach. I hope I said that right. And then with defensive coordinator Eric Washington at his first time as the play caller and really just being fully in charge of the defense without Matt Eberflus at the helm running that side of the ball. And we also need to touch on an injury report that has some really important players still not practicing this week. It could leave this offense quite depleted and this defense a little banged up on the back end as well. But I'm most curious about how Thomas Brown handles being a head coach. And there's a lot that goes into that because of his responsibilities on offense. And it's that balancing act that I'm going to be keeping the closest eye on here. Yeah, we'll talk in a minute about some of the head coaching duties that he needs to do better than Matt Eberflus. But like specifically, you're in charge of the offense and in charge of the whole team. So how does the offense look the same or different? Does it continue on its path from recent games, or is there a little bit of a hitch in the road here because you're going from having to just focus on Caleb and the offense to now having to focus on the entire team and focus on in-game time management stuff that we'll get into that in a moment here. But like with now Chris Beatty taking over as the offensive coordinator, I want to see, how the play calling stays the same or looks a little bit different. It'll still be Thomas Brown calling plays, but from the sideline instead of up in the booth. And without Matt Eberflus influencing, say, fourth down decisions or when to be aggressive and when not to be aggressive in certain situations. It's all Thomas Brown now. And what kind of rhythm then he's able to get this offense into. Because again, we think of the 49ers as a very good team. They've been so injured that their defense is outside of the top 20 in the NFL. The Bears offense should have an easier time this week than it has the last 3 weeks in a row based only on quality of opponent in here. But I want to see like offensive operation stuff here too. It's felt like even when Thomas Brown was offensive coordinator, but when Eberflus was the head coach, the communication process of getting the play call in from the sideline wasn't always super smooth. There were too many times when the play comes in late in the play clock, Caleb Williams is trying to get everybody lined up, and he either has to scramble and hurry really quickly to snap the ball on time, or there's been a couple of delay of games, or just a couple of burned timeouts that the Bears have had to waste because they couldn't get the play call in and communicated quickly enough for the offensive operation. And now, is that purely just Thomas Brown and Caleb Williams communication, or is there a layer of Matt Eberflus influence and communication there that slows that process down? And is that something that, with Thomas Brown being fully in charge of the whole operation, that he can specifically speed up and make sure that that play call is in as early as possible so the coaches are on the headset as long as possible and Caleb has the most time to make adjustments and read the defense and not be scrambling just to snap the ball on time before the play clock runs out? I'd also like to see if the Thomas Brown show can get off to a faster start. I mean, the offense has been playing better the last 3 weeks, against the Packers and Vikings and Lions. But outside of the Vikings game, which they got a touchdown in the first quarter, it was still some slower starts. Or maybe I'm mixing it up with it was the Packers game. No, regardless, they were trailing at halftime of the Vikings game. They were trailing at halftime in the Lions game. They got off to a faster start against the Packers, but it hasn't been a great first half team. This has been a second half offense for the most part these last 3 weeks. They've been slow out of the gate. They haven't been able to get into a rhythm early, but they've come out of halftime like gangbusters and look like a brand new offense. And that's another aspect of this that I'm going to be interested in, like halftime adjustments. It's a lot easier for Thomas Brown to focus his whole energy on adjustments at halftime and fixing things and coming out in the second half firing on all cylinders when he's just the offensive coordinator. But when he has to do, interview with the sideline reporter on the way to the locker room as a head coach, when he has to address the whole team and give the whole team speech and everything as a head coach, he's not going to have as much time to focus solely on offensive adjustments. That's where offensive coordinator Chris Beatty is going to be a bigger role in this sort of thing. And I want to see how that does or doesn't change now with Thomas Brown in more of this head coach role. Can they start faster? And even if they don't start fast, or I guess regardless, can they still adjust as well as they have at halftime? You can kind of say the same thing for the defense, and we'll talk about Eric Washington in a little bit here. But it's this juggling act between Thomas Brown being in charge of the offense and also being the head coach at the head of the team, because we're also going to be watching very closely how this new leadership of the coaching staff handles clock management, when they use timeouts and don't use timeouts. Particularly, I think we're thinking, end of half, end of game type of situations, but also, when you burn them early in the third quarter or stuff when you really need to save it. Like first half timeouts aren't that big of a deal because you don't even always use all three heading into halftime anyway. But second half is really where timeouts become a big deal, but challenges as well. We've heard Matt Eberflus say, hey, it was a big play, so we just wanted to throw the challenge flag. And we've kind of wondered in there, okay, how much of that is just Matt Eberflus making poor decisions, and how much of that is the people he has working upstairs on the review booth, that are reviewing it for the team and saying, hey, you should throw this flag, or no, you should not throw this flag, into his headset. I would imagine it's probably the same people that are going to be in Thomas Brown's headset as we're going to be in Matt Eberflus's headset. I mean, we haven't heard of them firing anybody or rearranging staff up there, but that's not something that would get super reported either, because it's kind of a lower level coaching staff front office position there. But I am curious if we see Thomas Brown really challenge much at all, and if it's a smarter challenge, or if he runs into the same obstacles because it's the same coaches that were contributing to the same mistakes for Matt Eberflus, and now it's just a different guy receiving the same input and maybe making some similar decisions there, or how much of that really was Matt Eberflus there, or if there will be a hesitancy from Thomas Brown to throw the challenge flag in some situations. If it's close, if it's 50-50, maybe he'll just pocket it and say, hey, maybe it's not worth the headache of getting this wrong and taking the kind of heat that Matt Eberflus took for getting it wrong. I mean, unless he can definitively feel like, oh yeah, we got a really good look at that one, so let's throw the flag. I wonder if he'll just be a little bit more cautious there, given that Matt Eberflus was a little more cavalier in terms of throwing the challenge flag all sort of willy-nilly there. So that's what's going to be interesting to watch. And also then how Thomas Brown adjusts his offense with the injuries the Bears are dealing with this week. Your top running backs are hurt. Your top wide receivers are hurt. A couple of interior offensive linemen are hurt. I do want to get to some of the injuries and how the Bears might adjust to those this week, as well as defensive coordinator Eric Washington entering his first game as a play caller in the NFL level next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, you can score an extra $30 off on top of that with our promo code NFL. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steaks, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, Locked On Bears listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code NFL. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with our promo code NFL. Minimum purchase may apply. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by Skylight Frames. If you're like me, you're still catching up on your holiday shopping and you're running out of ideas here. Maybe you overthink it a little bit, and it's just hard to find just the right gift for those loved ones in your life. But we've got the perfect idea for you. Skylight Frame is a touch screen digital photo frame that your whole family will love. You can upload thousands of photos from your phone and watch them appear in seconds. It's super easy to set up. It's seamless. And I love that it's like being able to share the photos without having to post it for the whole public on social media. It could just go to your loved one that has the frame. And of course, the touch screen on there is a game changer as well. You can swipe right through and tap to see the new photos that have been sent. And you can even tap a heart button to say thank you to the sender. And right now, as a special limited time offer for our listeners, you can get $20 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/NFL. That's SKYLIGHT, skylightframe.com/NFL. Get $20 off your purchase now at skylightframe.com/NFL. Not only is this Thomas Brown's first game as Chicago Bears head coach, but when you fire Matt Eberflus, you also fire your defensive play caller. So defensive coordinator Eric Washington has to take on defensive play calling duties. And as it turns out, he's never done that before, at least not at the NFL level. I mean, I don't know if he's coached high school or something early in his days, but if you look across his coaching career, he's been an assistant coach in college, an assistant coach in the NFL, and a defensive coordinator before in the NFL. But when he was Carolina Panthers defensive coordinator, he was not the play caller with the Carolina Panthers. And so this is now going to be his first task with those duties in the NFL. He only has those 2 years as Panthers defensive coordinator in 2018 and 2019, of course, under former Chicago Bear Ron Rivera, who handled the play calling duties there. But other than that, he was the Bears defensive line coach. He was the Carolina Panthers defensive line coach for like 7 years before he was finally promoted to defensive coordinator. And when the Bears hired him this year, they pulled him away from the Buffalo Bills, where he had been the defensive line coach and, technically an assistant head coach or whatever for the last 4 years. But this has largely been a guy who has been a position coach and has had some leadership roles, but not the actual snap to snap, down to down, play to play calling duties at his helm. And so I'm really curious to see what that's going to look like and how that's going to happen for Eric Washington, because it's not like Washington is going to come in and install a brand new defense. This is still going to be Matt Eberflus's defense over these final 5 games of the season. And we've seen Matt Eberflus's defense work just fine. Now, it has crumbled a bit the last 3 or 4 or 5 weeks and not looked as strong as we had come to expect from them. But how much of that was just not buying into the head coach as opposed to some problem within the scheme? I don't necessarily think that's the case. So Eric Washington doesn't have to come in here and totally reinvent the wheel. But that doesn't mean he has to come in and just do exactly, what would Coach Eberflus have called in this situation? What would Coach Eberflus do here? Because he wasn't perfect, certainly in a lot of areas, but even as a defensive coach, it wasn't a flawlessly coached and executed scheme on the back end either. And so I'm curious to see how much of Eric Washington's fingerprints we can see on this defense. First and foremost, he just needs to get back to the sort of energy and effort and focus that we had come to expect from this group that had been waning a bit in the last few weeks. We know this Bears defense is really talented. They're one of the most talented defenses in the NFL. And so that's not to say that the coaching and the play calling doesn't matter, but if these guys are dialed in, focused, and playing with good intensity and physicality, you don't have to be a perfect play caller here to have success with this defense. You don't have to be the most creative, innovative, 3 steps ahead, playing chess, not checkers type of defensive coach. You just have to make sure guys understand what their responsibilities are on every play, and if they execute it, they're big, fast, strong, and smart enough to make you look good as the defensive coordinator because of all the talent you have, in the secondary and at the linebacker position and along the defensive line. You've got guys who can make plays. We talk a lot about, players, not plays. Jimmys and Joes, not X's and O's. That's a big part of how this Bears defense is successful when those players are disciplined. When those players are bought in, playing with swagger and energy and just looking like they're enjoying it and playing out of there, that's where this Bears defense is its best. This defense feeds off of energy. And usually sometimes they need that big turnover to really get the energy going, but they got to believe and they got to be bought in. And we haven't felt that consistently enough in the last few weeks. And that to me feels like Eric Washington's biggest responsibility, first and foremost, is just get that back. The play calling from there is also important and a big part of the job, but like the play calling doesn't matter if the guys aren't bought in, right? So that you got to sort of start there and get everybody back on the same page and say, hey, we are a really good defense and need to get back to being a really good defense. From there, then you start to sprinkle in, okay, like how does he want to mix up coverages? How creative does he want to get on the back end? You know, is he going to sit in a little bit more of the vanilla, bland's not always a bad thing, and vanilla's not always a bad thing, but that's what it is, right? I mean, you know, drop back into your regular cover 2 or your regular cover 3, and players get to their landmarks, get to their zone, and turn and face the quarterback and read and react from there. Like there, you can do it that way. You can mix in, you know, more pattern match coverages, and you can disguise coverages in different ways and have different players go to different zones. And certainly, you know, when you mix in man-to-man, the Bears play it about a quarter of the time. So knowing when and where and how to sprinkle that in and sort of spruce up the defense here, it's much more of an art than a science. And that's sort of the art side of play calling. Now, fortunately, Eric Washington has been coaching in the NFL for a couple of decades now, I think. So he's been around multiple defensive play callers in Chicago and Buffalo and Carolina and Chicago before that. He's seen how this is done. It's not like he's going in there having no idea how this works. He just hasn't actually done it before himself, but I think he's got a lot of ideas and a lot of things that he wants to try and do and feel like, okay, if I ever got the chance, I would do that differently or I would do that differently. And I think I'm not worried about it. I'm just curious to see how similar it looks or how different it looks. Because, like, for example, one of the things it felt like the Bears have gotten away from in the last 3 or 4 or 5 games is some of the aggressive looks they were giving up front. It doesn't mean that Eric Washington needs to get back to just, you know, all of a sudden the Bears are going to be a super blitzing defense. No, but you got to show some different things at the line of scrimmage for the opposing offense to have to adjust to. You might not even blitz very much at all, but there were it felt like earlier in the season when this Bears defense was really dialed in, you know, against teams like the Los Angeles Rams or the Carolina Panthers, you know, even at times against the Commanders when the defense was still playing well in that game, you know, they would walk both TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds up to the line of scrimmage and maybe Kyler Gordon, and it would look like those 3 guys might be blitzing, plus your 4 defensive linemen, and you might have 2 of them on the inside, 1 on the outside, or you might kind of rearrange guys. So the offensive line before the snap has to say, okay, who's got this guy, who's got these guys, and all of a sudden there's a lot more for them to have to communicate and be on the same page with, and you have to test that communication frequently. You know, sure, most of the time the offensive line is going to be able to communicate it properly and get it picked up, but you keep showing it to them for the one time that one guy mishears something and thinks, oh, you're supposed to block him and I'm going to block him. And then he realizes he's wrong and he's late getting over to somebody and it creates a pressure. Like, that's why you show the offense a bunch of different stuff. You don't always have to send those guys every single time. You don't have to abandon your principles in terms of wanting to generally be a 4-man rush. But if you just sort of mix up exactly what that 4-man rush is going to look like each time, so the defense isn't sure exactly which 4 guys are going to rush or where those 4 rushers are going to come from, and if they're going to then stunt and loop around. Like, the Bears got to more of that early in the season, and it felt like an evolution of Matt Eberflus as a defensive play caller. And then it's felt anecdotally like the last few weeks like they've gotten further away from that and have been a little bit more basic up front with 4 down linemen moving around and just, you know, they're doing their rush and everybody else is clearly dropping back into coverage, and there's no mystery as to who's coming from where. I know that injuries can play a factor in how confident you are as a play caller in terms of getting creative. You know, if you've got backup defensive tackles in there with, you know, now Andrew Billings is on injured reserve, and there have been times where Zach Pickens and other guys are hurt, so you don't have your full starting caliber personnel. Maybe you don't trust the backups to do the more creative, tricky stuff in there. And same thing maybe on the back end coverage wise. You know, can you get as creative in coverage if you're missing maybe both your starting safeties this week? They're both on the injury report, and that's going to create some challenges here. Even if they play, they might not be 100%, and you might have at least one backup in there. And then on offense for Thomas Brown, hey, first game as head coach, you might be missing a couple wide receivers and a couple of running backs and a couple of offensive linemen as well. So we'll go through some of the big injuries that have popped up on the Bears injury report and how that shapes the debut games, calling plays for Eric Washington and head coaching for Thomas Brown next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at IceShakers. I know you're like me and the holiday shopping is still pretty far from complete, but if that's the case for you, I got another perfect gift idea for the passionate sports fan in your life. Perhaps you heard of IceShakers? IceShaker is now officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, NBA, NCAA, MLB, and will make the ideal gift. It's created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers. The IceShakers have sold over 1 million bottles and changed the game with workout bottles, and it's the gift you've been looking for. If you go to IceShaker.com and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at checkout, you can save 25% on your order. These are the legitimate, like, ice will stay cold in your cup for 30 plus hours. They third-party tested it. You know that your stuff is staying cold. It's vacuum sealed in that way to make sure that your stuff isn't going to warm up like some of the other plastic shaker cups you might have seen before. And they've got a patented twist-in agitator that breaks up powders, but it's silent when you shake it instead of that annoying little metal ball that's always rattling around in there. So order your Bears or other team-branded bottles today at IceShaker.com and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your order. Show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market, IceShakers. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by our friends at DoorDash, the best way to get all of your favorites delivered right to your door, especially on game day. It's so convenient to have your favorite game day food, snacks, and drinks right on DoorDash without missing a play. You get to halftime and your chips are running out, your soda is running out, whatever it's going to be, DoorDash can have that brought to your door so that you can finish out your second half, especially those big moments at the end of the game. We don't want to have to get up and go try and find something else or make something else or put something else together or, heaven forbid, run to a store. Absolutely not. DoorDash makes sure that you don't miss a moment. Or even, during the week, you want a meal delivered from one of your favorite local restaurants, especially as the weather gets colder and colder. And I don't want to leave the house. I don't want to go out in the wind and snow in the cold car and drive through all that. Absolutely not. Let DoorDash take care of it with all your favorites. You can still support your favorite local restaurants and businesses from the comfort of your own home. Right now, if you use our promo code LOCKEDFALL24, you're going to get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. This is a limited time offer and terms apply. The promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. At DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites and remember that promo code LOCKEDFALL24. Must be 21 plus to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol only available in select markets. So you've got new coaches, and you might have new lineups for each of them, be it based on the injuries the Bears have been facing this week as they get ready for the 49ers. You might think, hey, long week after the Thursday night game against the Lions, more time for guys to get healthy. That's perhaps true, but also it was a short week to get ready for the Lions, so maybe guys weren't as recovered as they could have been entering that game and then worsened some things that maybe they were dealing with entering that game. And of course now, all right, guys are hitting the pause button here a little bit. And maybe part of it is like, all right, like, Matt Eberflus isn't here anymore. Like, we fired our coach. Maybe I can take it a little bit easy. I'd like to not think that's the case. I think this is just guys that have been dealing with stuff all season where it's finally catching up to them because we're really in the dog days of the football year. But all of a sudden, it's key players at key positions and like specifically stacking key players at key positions. That's what's concerning. Okay, if you're missing one wide receiver, it sucks, but you can get by. Or if you're missing one offensive lineman, again, big deal, but you can get by. Or one safety, you can get by. But when you have multiple guys at the same positions, all of a sudden you start getting down to, third string type players, maybe needing to be in your starting lineup. And that's where, hey, welcome to the NFL, Thomas Brown and Eric Washington. You got a bunch of backups out there. Figure it out. Everyone's judging you. Everyone wants to see if you can be a real head coach. All right, well, real head coaches deal with real injuries at really important positions. So if you look at the Bears injury report from Thursday, you have DJ Moore missing practice for the second straight day. You have running back DeAndre Swift missing practice for the second straight day, and running back Roschon Johnson missing practice for the second straight day. Your number one wide receiver and your two top running backs have not practiced this week, and it's definitely a concern as to whether or not they would be able to play on Sunday. If you don't have Swift or Roschon Johnson, Travis Homer becomes your top running back on the depth chart. I don't know that I love that as my top backfield option. And then they have two running backs on the practice squad that they would probably call up both, honestly. If both your running backs are going to be hurt, you're probably going to call up both guys. Former Chicago Bear Darrington Evans, who's been brought back. They'd signed him as a free agent from the Titans a couple years ago. And then also Demetric Felton, who had been with the Bears during training camp briefly this season. He's been brought back as well. He's a UCLA running back who's bounced around with the Browns and the Bengals and a few other teams. So if your running back room is Travis Homer, Demetrius Felton, and Darrington Evans, that doesn't feel good for giving Caleb Williams a running game that you can really, really count on. I mean, just think of it from a fantasy football perspective. If you had to put one of those guys in your starting fantasy lineup, would you feel great about it? Probably not. So I don't feel great about what that would give Caleb. But Thomas Brown has said none of those guys are ruled out just yet. They do have a chance to play, but they got to see how the week goes. I'd like to think the Bears can get one of them back, maybe, hopefully, but we'll see. It could be a little bit tricky in the ground game. Then at wide receiver, DJ Moore misses practice both days. Keenan Allen missed practice the first day, but was back in full on Thursday. So you should have Keenan Allen. You'll have Rome Odunze. So no need to totally panic at wide receiver just yet. And to be fair, like DJ Moore's been nicked and bruised and banged up in every game this season. He's had hits where he gets up slowly, and he's been able to play through them for the most part. So I'm not necessarily... I still think there's a decent chance he could play, even though he hasn't practiced much. We'll see. I don't know the extent of his injury and what he's dealing with now, but he's played through so much this season. That sort of comes with then the expectation that he'll keep playing through stuff unless it's really, really severe. And maybe this revises to that case, but I'm still holding out a little bit of hope that he could play and at least give Caleb his full complement of receivers, even if he doesn't have his full complement of weapons. He might not have his full complement of offensive linemen either, which adds to maybe the running game struggles here too. But we've seen Coleman Shelton, your starting center, limited both days with a knee injury. Usually limited players are still able to give it a go, but we'll see how Friday goes on the weekend. And then your top backup option for him, Ryan Bates, has been missing practice with a concussion. Missed both days this week, and I don't know that that's optimistic to turn a corner here all of a sudden and be good to go on Friday. So I guess it feels weird to say you're hoping Coleman Shelton can go at center because you don't have Bates as an option, and your third stringer would be Doug Kramer, who I think we all kind of like as a person or whatever, but like don't necessarily want him under center in the starting lineup in the game, blocking Caleb Williams right up the middle, especially against a defense that is certainly injured with the 49ers, but still not a terrible defense by any means. A lot of talent in that front seven still that Doug Kramer would have to be responsible for if Coleman Shelton can't go. But I think Shelton should be able to go, and Darnell Wright goes from limited to a full participant. So your tackle should be good. Your guard should be fine. It's the center position that is going to be at best banged up and at worst at a third string player in there. The only other spot that really stands out from the injury report then is the safety position, where you have Kevin Byard limited at practice both days so far this week, and with a shoulder injury. And he's a veteran who's never missed a game in his career, so I would expect Kevin Byard's still going to play. And then Elijah Hicks, who has missed the last couple games, is still missing practice with an ankle injury. I'm guessing he's not going to be able to go just yet. So at the very least, you'll have Jonathan Owens, who started last week, and he's at least has some experience under his belt. I would assume Kevin Byard's not going to miss a game for the first time in his career here. He might have missed one game due to injury earlier, but you know what I mean? He's an Iron Man. He doesn't miss games, and I'm not expecting him to miss this game, but he has been limited at practice, so he might not be 100% out there. So, all right, Eric Washington, you have a half starting safety if Kevin Byard's injured, and then like a backup safety is your safeties on the back end. You got to put a lot of faith in those guys to cover deep, depending on what coverages you're going to run. Like that's going to be a factor for both of these coaches. Thomas Brown obviously dealing with bigger losses on offense than what Eric Washington is going to be dealing with on defense there, but how they're able to adapt and overcome will say a lot about what they can give you as coaches, at what Thomas Brown can do as a head coach, what Eric Washington can do as a play-calling defensive coordinator, because it's not just an audition for the Bears and the future of their spot on this team, but these 5 games, starting with this one against the 49ers, is an audition for the rest of the NFL. Even if no one's going to hire Thomas Brown as a head coach this cycle, they're going to consider him as an offensive coordinator, and he's going to be on the radar for everyone as a potential future head coach. I mean, you never know. He could get hired as early as this cycle. If someone was really, really impressed with him, he's going to be in those conversations now, having been the interim head coach here, especially if he's successful. And Eric Washington wants to keep being a defensive coordinator in the NFL, and if he can look good as a play caller, that'll go a long way towards him being able to land another DC job right away and not just have to go back to being a defensive line specialist, defensive line coach guy that only operates with that one position, especially because that's his position. That's what I want to see him as a play caller now if he puts those guys in an even better position to succeed. Whatever happens against the 49ers on Sunday, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to check out our live postcast after the Bears game, Locked On Chicago Sports YouTube channel. It's a different channel than where these videos, they listen. If you watch the Locked On Bears podcast on YouTube, Locked On Chicago Sports is a different channel because he does postcasts for Bulls games and baseball games in season and hockey games in season and stuff. But after the Bulls game, Joe George goes live on the Locked On Chicago Sports YouTube channel, and the audio of that gets put in the Locked On Bears podcast feed. But if you want to catch it live and be a part of the live conversation, go to the Locked On Chicago Sports YouTube channel immediately after the Bears 49ers game. Catch that show, then come on back for Monday's episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.